They gave the world Lisa Lisa and Cult Jam. They resurrected James Brown. They even laced hits for the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. Yet ask the average fan who Full Force is, and you'll probably get a blank stare. How can a group of 6 family members who changed the sound of R&B and hip-hop be remembered more for playing the Bullies in House Party than for producing multi-platinum records? Was Full Force one of the most underrated and exploited hit factories in music history? Or did their over-the-top image and industry politics bury their true legacy? This is the story of the unsung architects of an entire era, the scandal, the struggles, and the silent impact of Full Force. Before the platinum plaques, before the Hollywood cameos, Full Force was just a family of Brooklyn kids trying to carve out space in a music industry that wasn't designed for them. The group wasn't assembled by a label executive or some talent scout. It was born in the neighborhood. 3 brothers, bow-legged Lou, Paul Anthony, and B Fine, and their 3 cousins, Baby Jerry, Kurt TT, and Shy Shy. 6 family members, each with a different gift: production, instruments, vocals, and attitude. Together, they became a unit that felt more like a musical army than just another R&B act. In the mid-70s, when disco and funk ruled the streets of New York, these 6 young men were already experimenting with a sound that blended hard funk bass lines, sweet R&B harmonies, and raw streetwise hip-hop energy. Their earliest gigs were nothing glamorous, grinding at community shows, Apollo amateur nights, and battling to get noticed. But from the beginning, their mission was clear. If the industry wouldn't let them in the front door, they'd build their own door. By the early 80s, Full Force was fully locked in, writing, rehearsing, and plotting to break through. Unlike other groups that leaned on managers or outsiders, their biggest strength was family unity. They weren't just another band. They were a bloodline determined to force their way into music history. The turning point came in 1984, when Full Force found themselves in the right place at the right time with the right idea. Hip-hop was still young, raw, and mostly underground, but they saw its potential long before the record execs did. That year, they produced a track for a Brooklyn rap trio called UTFO. The song was called Roxanne, Roxanne. No one could have predicted what happened next. The record exploded, not just as a hit, but as the spark for what became known as the Roxanne Wars. Suddenly, dozens of rappers were dropping their own Roxanne response tracks, turning one Full Force beat into one of the most bizarre and creative rap battles in history. Overnight, Full Force had stamped themselves as trendsetters, producers who could take a local idea and set the entire hip-hop community on fire. Off that momentum, the group made the boldest move possible. They stepped out from behind the mixing boards and dropped their own self-titled debut album in 1985. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it proved they were more than just background players. Tracks like Alice, I Want You Just For Me put them on the charts and got them recognition as performers. The album reached the Billboard 200 and climbed into the top 30 on the R&B charts. No small feat for 6 young, unpolished guys from Brooklyn trying to balance producing, writing, and performing all at once. But their biggest impact wasn't measured by their own hits yet. It was in the way they shifted the sound of R&B and hip-hop, creating a fusion that was harder, funkier, and sharper than what labels were used to pushing. Full Force wasn't just chasing a lane, they were building one. If Roxanne, Roxanne was the spark, then Lisa Lisa and Cult Jam was the wildfire. In 1985, Full Force discovered and developed a young Puerto Rican singer from Hell's Kitchen named Lisa Velez. Paired with her group Cult Jam, Full Force crafted a sound that felt brand new. Raw hip-hop beats laced with soaring R&B hooks. It was fresh, it was urban, and it was perfect for the MTV generation. The results? Unstoppable. I Wonder If I Take You Home hit the Billboard Hot 100 and turned into a crossover smash. Then came All Cried Out, Head to Toe, and Lost in Emotion, each one bigger than the last, dominating radio and turning Lisa Lisa and Cult Jam into one of the most successful acts of the late 80s. And behind every one of those records, Full Force. But they didn't stop there. In 1988, when James Brown, the godfather of soul himself, needed a comeback, who did he call? Full Force. They gave him I'm Real, a gritty, street-smart update that shot straight to number 2 on the R&B charts. For a legend in the twilight of his career, that record was a lifeline. And it proved Full Force could resurrect icons, not just create new stars. From there, their fingerprints were everywhere. They wrote for Patti LaBelle, crafted hits for Cheryl Pepsi Riley, Thanks for My Child, pushed pop provocateur Samantha Fox, and even guided TV stars like Jasmine Guy into music careers. Every record carried the full force stamp, thumping bass lines, tight vocal arrangements, and a mix of hip-hop aggression with R&B emotion. By the late 80s, their reputation was sealed. Full Force weren't just producers, they were architects of the new sound of R&B. Long before Teddy Riley popularized New Jack Swing, Full Force was already blending rap, funk, and smooth vocals into a crossover formula. The tragedy, while their songs topped charts and made other artists household names, the group itself was still stuck in the shadows. They had the hits, but not the fame. For all their success behind the scenes, Full Force wanted more than just royalty checks and liner note credits. They wanted to be stars in their own right. So while they were producing platinum records for others, they kept pushing their own music, determined to prove they could stand on the same stage as the acts they created. In 1985, their self-titled debut album gave the world a taste of their style, raw, funky, and unapologetically loud. Songs like Alice, I Want You Just For Me landed them on the charts and hinted at what could have been a breakout moment. By 1986, with Guess Who's Comin' to the Crib, they doubled down on their larger-than-life personalities. Part R&B crooners, part street corner tough guys. Tracks like Temporary Love Thing found some success on the R&B charts, but never crossed over the way their productions for Lisa Lisa or Cheryl Pepsi Riley did. That was the recurring pattern. Albums like Full Force Get Busy One Time, 1986, and Smooth, 1989, kept them visible, but the spotlight never burned as bright as it did when they were writing for others. Critics sometimes dismissed them as too flashy, with their muscular physiques, aggressive stage antics, and bold fashion choices overshadowing their vocal and musical skills. In an era dominated by polished groups like New Edition and Guy, Full Force was often seen as too raw, too unconventional. But that rawness was the point. Their shows weren't about smooth choreography. They were about power, energy, and attitude. Full Force on stage looked like six guys who could either sing you a love ballad or start a fight in the same breath. They were unpredictable, sometimes campy, sometimes intimidating, and always unforgettable. Still, while their peers were climbing charts, Full Force's own singles mostly stalled in the middle ranks. They were hit makers, but not hit performers. The irony was brutal. They had the talent, but the industry seemed more comfortable with them in the background. If the music industry wasn't going to crown Full Force as superstars, Hollywood would at least make them unforgettable characters. In 1990, the group made a left turn that nobody saw coming. They hit the big screen in the cult classic House Party. Playing the neighborhood bullies who constantly harass Kid and Play, Full Force stole every scene they were in. With their muscles, gold chains, and over-the-top bravado, they were cartoonish and menacing at the same time. The perfect balance of comedy and toughness. Bow-legged Lou's sneering delivery of lines like, "Pop the trunk," turned into meme-worthy quotes before memes even existed. The movie blew up, spawning sequels and cementing Kid and Play as icons of early 90s hip-hop. But it also immortalized Full Force in a whole new way. For an entire generation, they weren't just producers or singers, they were those dudes from House Party. That role, meant as comic relief, ended up being one of the most visible moments of their career. But their presence didn't stop there. They reprised their roles in House Party 2 and even popped up in other films and TV projects throughout the 90s. They became part of the visual language of hip-hop culture, the buff, loud, intimidating crew you couldn't ignore. And while some critics argued that playing thuggish caricatures reinforced stereotypes, Full Force leaned into the exposure. They knew that visibility mattered, whether you knew them for Lisa Lisa's hits or as the bad guys chasing Kid and Play, the name Full Force stuck in people's minds. By the mid-90s, their pop culture footprint was undeniable. Hit records, production credits on legends, and faces instantly recognizable from one of the most iconic hip-hop comedies of all time. The irony? Their Hollywood fame made them more recognizable to the public than their own records ever did. By the early 90s, Full Force had already proven themselves as architects of crossover R&B and hip-hop. But what came next showed just how versatile and underestimated they really were. While many of their peers faded with the end of the 80s, Full Force reinvented themselves as behind-the-scenes power brokers who could shape any era. They kicked off the 90s with Cheryl Pepsi Riley's heartbreaking ballad, Thanks for My Child. That record became an anthem for single mothers everywhere, hitting #1 on the R&B charts. Once again, Full Force wasn't just making music, they were capturing entire experiences and putting them to melody. Then came the pop invasion. Long before it was cool for R&B producers to cross over into bubblegum pop, Full Force was already in the mix. They wrote and produced for the Backstreet Boys and Unsung, helping fuel the boy band takeover of the late 90s. They even contributed to the rise of Britney Spears. Yes, the same group of Brooklyn brothers and cousins that gave us Roxanne were now shaping the soundtrack of TRL. The 2000s only expanded their reach. They touched careers from Rihanna to Justin Timberlake, proving their sound could flex with the times. Unlike so many producers who were locked into one era, Full Force kept finding ways to stay relevant, always one step ahead of the trends. And while their own records weren't chart toppers, the royalties kept stacking. Their catalog became a quiet goldmine, sampled, remixed, and reimagined by new artists year after year. But here's the twist. While their influence stretched across 3 decades and multiple genres, their name still wasn't front and center. Fans screamed for Britney or Backstreet, but almost none realized the beats and hooks were coming from the same group that once bullied Kid and Play on screen. It was both their biggest strength and their cruelest curse. The more they succeeded behind the curtain, the less the spotlight ever pointed their way. For all the hits, Full Force's story has always carried a darker undertone. The sense that they were constantly being underrated, undercredited, or outright dismissed by the very industry they helped fuel. Their first controversy wasn't about scandalous headlines or public feuds. It was about visibility. Full Force could hand a young act like Lisa and Cult Jam platinum records. Yet when award season came around, the producers never got the spotlight. The artists did. Labels and executives packaged Full Force as hitmakers for hire, not as stars. That industry pigeonholing haunted them for decades. Then there was their image. 6 muscular, loud Brooklyn guys with wild outfits and comic book bravado. To fans, it was unforgettable. But to industry gatekeepers, it was too much. Too raw. Too street. Critics accused them of leaning on gimmicks, more style than substance, despite their undeniable talent. In an era when polished groups like New Edition, Guy, and later Boys II Men were marketed as safe crossover faces of R&B, Full Force was treated as outsiders, talented enough to produce the hits, but not clean-cut enough to be the faces of them. Behind the scenes, the group also endured brutal personal battles. The most public came in the 2010s, when Paul Anthony was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer. His fight became a very different kind of stage, raising awareness, inspiring fans, and showing the same resilience that powered their music. But it also pulled back the curtain on just how fragile even legends can be. There were also whispers of label politics holding them back. Full Force had the catalog, the credibility, and the energy, yet never seemed to get the marketing push that their contemporaries enjoyed. In a business built on branding, their reputation as producers often overshadowed their potential as frontmen. The hardest truth? Full Force's biggest struggle wasn't drugs, arrests, or public meltdowns. It was the quiet, relentless grind of being giants in influence, but ghosts in recognition. Ask most casual fans who made All Cried Out or who put James Brown back on the charts in the late 80s, and they'll probably shrug. But industry insiders know the truth. Full Force was the engine. Their fingerprints are everywhere, from the dawn of the Roxanne wars to the boy band explosion of the late 90s. They bridged the gap between street-level hip-hop and radio-friendly R&B before New Jack Swing had a name. They wrote anthems for women like Cheryl Pepsi Riley, gave Lisa her career, revived James Brown, and later lent their touch to Britney, Backstreet, NSYNC, Rihanna, and Justin Timberlake. Few groups in history can say they shaped 3 different eras of music, yet Full Force can. And while their own singles never topped the pop charts, their catalog became eternal through samples, remakes, and licensing. Younger artists borrow their DNA without even realizing it. Tracks like All Cried Out have lived on in multiple generations, from Lisa to Allure to countless covers. Even Hollywood gave them immortality. For anyone who grew up in the 90s, their house party roles remain iconic. turning them into cult figures that hip-hop and film fans alike can still quote. In recent years, their influence has finally started getting more respect. Documentaries, interviews, and unsung-style retrospectives now highlight Full Force as pioneers, not just background players. They've been honored for their contributions to both R&B and hip-hop, and their names are now spoken with the reverence that eluded them in their prime. Most importantly, they showed the blueprint for what today's producer artists could be. Before Pharrell, Timbaland, or Jermaine Dupri ever balanced producing and performing, Full Force proved it was possible. Even if the industry didn't reward them properly, their legacy isn't just in the records, it's in the attitude. Family first, larger than life, and unstoppable, even when the spotlight tried to pass them by. Nearly 4 decades after they first shook the music world, Full Force is still standing. The group continues to perform on the old-school R&B circuit, headlining throwback concerts and nostalgia tours that celebrate the golden era of the 80s and 90s. On stage, they bring the same mix of comedy, energy, and muscle that made them unforgettable in House Party, but now with the added weight of being legends. Off the stage, their legacy is still paying dividends. Full Force's catalog remains a royalty machine, sampled and reinterpreted by younger artists. Their songs still pop up in movies, commercials, and streaming playlists, reminding new audiences of just how much ground they covered. The group has also leaned into storytelling. They've appeared in documentaries, industry retrospectives, and interviews, finally getting recognition for being the backbone of hits that define generations. Younger producer artists often name-drop them as trailblazers, acknowledging that Full Force walked so others could run. On the personal side, Paul Anthony's long battle with cancer turned into a mission. After going into remission, he became a health and awareness advocate, using his platform to inspire fans dealing with their own struggles. His survival is seen as a symbol of the group's resilience, a reminder that Full Force doesn't just make it through eras, they fight through them. As of 2025, their estimated collective net worth sits in the multi-millions, largely thanks to production royalties, licensing, and decades of songwriting credits. But money isn't their headline. What they'll really be remembered for is how they shaped the sound of R&B, hip-hop, and even pop, all while staying true to who they were, a family unit from Brooklyn that refused to fade away.